Hey, it's Josh, and I have on my EMS shirt once again, which means it's time to chat about another paramedic-related issue. So here's a question for you paramedic students out there. When you start running scenarios, what's the one thing they start drilling into your head right from the beginning? What's the thing that you do, regardless of the scenario you're doing, every single time you're walking into the scene right at the beginning? You're looking around, you're saying, I am checking scene safety. I'm looking for any potential hazards. Every single scenario you run, that's what you're saying. In the classroom, it becomes a bit of a prosaic thing, very kind of cliche almost and boring. But out on the streets, it is real AF. So in this video, I'm going to be chatting about one particular instance where scene safety went completely haywire for me, and then I'm going to be just hitting on some basic points about scene safety. So let's get into that. I had a request from a viewer for more stories from my paramedic career, and it just so happens that I've finally started writing my book about the 16 years I spent working as a paramedic, and I guess it makes sense that people want to hear about the war stories. So what I've decided to do with these videos now is incorporate stories from my own experience with the topic that I happen to be chatting about. So here's a sneak peek at a passage from a book that I hope will eventually be written. I actually originally wrote this immediately after it happened, I think the day after I finished the night shift, and here's what I had written at that point. I've just finished working the third night shift in a set of 4 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shifts, and this one got off to a wild start. My regular partner is off for the 4 nights, and I've been working with a brand new level 1 paramedic. He's a tall, muscular, athletic boy and is super nice. Our first call of the night was at an apartment in a high-rise in a neighborhood known for gang violence. Some guy called 911 and said that a woman had come over from a neighboring apartment saying she wanted someone to call an ambulance, but the caller would not give any further info, saying he did not want to get involved. As I was driving to the call, I asked for our dispatcher to send police to respond with us. The first thing is driving to the scene. The most consistently dangerous thing you'll do as a paramedic is drive lights and sirens on the streets. It's a high-risk thing to do. I think I'm going to do another whole separate video about driving the ambulance, but it's something that you need to keep in mind, that even though you're trying to get somewhere quickly, you need to get there safely. The other thing that I did in that situation as we were driving to the scene was get on the radio early and request the cops' presence, knowing that this was a potentially dangerous situation for us. And when we arrived, I kept out of sight of the building's entrance until our dispatcher informed us that the police were on scene. Related to that, when we did arrive at the scene, we staged a distance away until we knew that the police were there to secure the scene for us. One thing I did was park out of sight so that anybody who was still on scene that could be a danger to us wouldn't see us approaching, and I requested that our dispatcher let us know when the police had arrived. Now, I know that over the years, the policies on staging and waiting for police changed for us in Toronto. Initially, it was something that was just a given, that if there was a dangerous situation, we wouldn't be going into that scene until we knew it was safe for us to do so. However, there was at least one high-profile incident where a gentleman died while the paramedic crew was staged waiting for the police to arrive. There was a lot of media pressure as a result, and our policies changed so that we were increasingly pushed to go into these scenes ourselves to assess the danger, which was not a great thing for us as street paramedics. We felt we were being put at risk because certain goals had to be met about response times and so on. When I drove up to the building, there was a single police cruiser with 2 cops talking to 2 young males who were sitting in a white Ford Explorer, which they had stopped in front of the high-rise. One cop was a gray-haired older guy, and the other one was a new, fresh-faced young guy. I pulled up and asked if the cops were heading up to the apartment, and the older cops said they were just talking to these guys in the SUV, who apparently had been in the process of leaving the building in a big hurry when they arrived. I pulled the ambulance up behind the SUV. When we did discover that it was safe to go in, I parked the ambulance just a bit out from the curb, a little distance behind the police cruiser. By doing so, I would block approaching traffic and force them to take a wide berth around the police and the car that they were investigating in order to increase the safety for the police officers and potentially for us as well once we were out of the ambulance. That's a common situation you run into when you're responding to traffic accidents, for instance, or really anything that happens on the street. You're trying to position your ambulance to be a barrier to approaching traffic in order to increase the safety of everyone who's working on that scene. And the young cop headed into the building because the call was apparently for a domestic assault and he wanted to go up to the apartment to check things out. Now, I was watching this with a great deal of skepticism, thinking, okay, so this older cop is going to stay by himself with the guys in the SUV, and the young cop is going up all by himself into a domestic violence situation. That can't be the smartest idea. But the cops are doing what they do. So my partner and I got out of the ambulance, and I was waiting to ask the older cop what he thought we should do when one of the young men got out of the passenger seat of the SUV and told the cop he was just going to walk home. He was sweating profusely and he looked really nervous. The cop told the guy he wasn't going anywhere until he could make sure he wasn't involved in the domestic assault. They argued back and forth for a minute or two, then all of a sudden the dude bolted down the street as fast as he could run. The older cop took off running after him, but it became immediately apparent that he wasn't going to come close to catching this guy. My first thought as I was standing there at the side of the road was to run and catch the guy for the cop, and I took a few steps forward, then immediately thought, maybe tackling a young man in a real sketchy neighborhood at night isn't the smartest thing I could be doing right now. If he were to pull a knife or gun on me, I don't have any body armor or any real way of protecting myself. Now, as you're walking into any emergency situation, there's a big risk of developing tunnel vision. It's something that just comes along with the whole fight or flight adrenaline response. Your peripheral vision sort of goes out the window and you become very laser focused on the most visually wild thing of whatever it is you're walking into. But as paramedics, it's so important to keep your head on a swivel, to almost have half your brain in a situation where you're kind of almost above the situation, observing everything that's going on around, while the other half of your brain is sort of focused on the tasks that you need to do. It's super important to always watch the people in particular that are around you, as well as any other hazards like traffic if you're out on the street. My inexperienced partner, however, did take off on the heels of the old cop and got halfway down the street before he too started to think better of that course of action and began to run slower and slower. In the meantime, I had decided to run back to the ambulance. I hopped in and took off in pursuit of all three of them. I screeched to a stop to pick up my partner, and we went to pick up the older cop. Meanwhile, the cop had gotten on his radio and his young partner had come running out of the building, jumped in the police cruiser, and went racing past our ambulance. We caught up to the old cop around the corner and asked if he wanted to hop in, but he said he had lost the guy and would continue looking around the neighborhood on foot. He asked us to go back to the building and get the license plate of the Explorer because they apparently hadn't bothered to get any information while they were on scene. So I drove back, but of course the other dude had taken advantage of the situation to get the hell out of there. So we parked in front of the building to see what would transpire. A couple of minutes later, our dispatcher, who had no idea any of this was going down, called us because they were getting information that a call was coming in just a few blocks from our location for a cop that had been struck by a car. My partner and I looked at each other and both of us were thinking, oh damn, the older cop just got run over. And finally, there's the issue of dealing with people who are potentially violent. And I think that's another topic I'm going to do a whole separate video on at some point. But the main key I found is to remain calm in the face of even a violent or aggressive person. And that really helps to de-escalate the situation. Although I found a lot of people in emergency services, including paramedics, are very high-strung type A personalities, and they naturally get kind of wound up when faced with aggression, whereas I like to really keep things really calm, and that helps to defuse situations at times. So we went racing over there and discovered that the young cop was actually the one that had been injured. Apparently, he had continued his pursuit of the young man in his cruiser and had caught up to him just as the guy had reached another car which was parked on a side street. The cop had jumped out of his cruiser and had tried to grab the guy, but the guy began fighting back, so the cop started screaming into his radio for help, but no one on the police radio channel could make out anything that he was saying. Punches and kicks were traded between the young guy and the young cop, and the cop eventually managed to get him to the ground, but the guy struggled free and started to get into his car. The cop grabbed him by the pants and tried to pull him back down, but the guy undid his belt and jumped in the car without his pants on. At this point, the cop attempted to pepper spray him, but somehow managed to pepper spray himself full in the face instead. The other guy managed to drive off and clipped the cop with his car in the process. The cop sustained only a minor injury from the car and was much more concerned about the face full of pepper spray and the burning in his eyes. So once the cops with all the stripes on their epaulets arrived on scene and were able to get things sorted out, we took the young one over to the hospital while another ambulance crew responded to the apartment to look after the original assault victim. It looks like the two bad guys got away, and I felt bad that I hadn't chosen to chase the guy on foot because a cop ended up getting hurt and the violent offenders had escaped. Yep, just another night shift in the big city. So the key in all of this, obviously, is your safety as a paramedic. And if you are not safe, then you create a wide variety of other problems. If something happens to the paramedics that are on scene, then you can't treat the person who you're there to help. You have to send more resources, both for yourself and for your patient or patients. And besides your own health and well-being, you're creating a lot of issues for everybody else as well. So if you're out on those streets, I hope you stay safe, and I'll catch you with the next video. Hey, it's Josh. Thank you so much for watching. If you could reach out and touch that like button, caress that subscribe button, show some love to that notifications bell, and give somebody the gift of the link to this video, that would mean the world to me. Cheers. Your peripheral... Hey, it's Josh, and I have on my EMS shirt again. Your peripheral... So, here's your peripheral... It sort of comes along with the whole epinephrine... No. Your peripheral... And I think that's another video that... Your peripheral...